Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's ILTA presentation, Creating and Implementing Effective Disaster Recovery Practices. I'm Gail Persa-Kelly, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Our speakers today are Sherry Gini, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Goldberg Kohn, and Pat Spencer, Technical Sales Executive at Bluelock. I also want to thank Bluelock for sponsoring today's webinar. Our presentation today will run about 45 to 60 minutes, and we ask you to submit all questions to the Q&A box. And if we do not answer them during the presentation, we will address them at the end. Before we start, please know that we are recording today's webinar, and we'll post the link to our website under recording shortly after today's presentation. At the end of the presentation, we ask that you take a few moments to complete the evaluation. I will now turn the webinar over to Pat and Sherry.
Gail, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. Again, my name is Pat Spencer, and I'm in sales with Bluelock, and would like to introduce one of our clients, Sherry Gini with Goldberg Kohn. And realizing we have a fairly diverse audience today, I think it's important to understand Sherry's role within the law firm and what her responsibility is with regard to information technology, as well as business continuity and disaster recovery. So, Sherry, do you want to take just a couple minutes and tell the audience a little bit about your background and your responsibilities at the law firm?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. So again, Sherry Gini from Goldberg Kohn. We're a mid-sized law firm in Chicago. I've been with the firm for close to 18 years. My most recent role I started about 3 years ago, and that's Chief Operating Officer. I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of the firm. I also sit on the management committee with 7 partners, and we're responsible for the strategic initiatives of the firm. I work very closely with our director-level employees, in particular our Director of Technology. As many of you know, technology has taken on a focal point because of security measures over the last few years. And so I've been involved in those projects and also with the disaster recovery project that we implemented last year.
Great, Sherry. Thank you. Thank you very much. And the focus of our time today is really going to be spent listening and hearing from Sherry and the journey she went through with regards to disaster recovery for the law firm. But one thing I'd like to do, because typically we do this at the end, and a lot of times we may not get time for it, is to establish a little bit about what Bluelock is all about, who we are. So I'm just going to spend just a couple minutes here. But at a very high level, we've been around for 11 years, beginning from really being a cloud hosting provider, focusing on infrastructure as a service, as well as disaster recovery as a service. And certainly the technology has changed over the last 11 years. But to our point today, what we're seeing with law firms specifically is client demand really driving some of the change with regards to business continuity and disaster recovery. And obviously, as recent as yesterday in the news with additional ransomware attacks on a fairly large law firm, we see that it's not going to go away. And so part of our goal today is to help educate on what some law firms are trying to do to mitigate some of that and really establish programs on how to react to that as well. But with regards to Bluelock, being around for 11 years, there's a lot of expertise that we focus on with our clients. So we work to build that partnership and more or less communicate our expertise, as well as providing flexible environments for our clients to grow and to manage, more or less either their production or their DR environments, and then also provide that level of support. You may hear Sherry call it a white glove approach, if you will, but certainly we want to be that partner with our clients. Now, in terms of disaster recovery as a service, for some folks, this still could be a newer term in the industry. Gartner has published the Magic Quadrant. This is actually the 3rd year that they've done that. And so it is a newer solution, if you will, from a Gartner perspective that they're doing research on. And we look at this as really a process, if you will. And it begins with understanding the organization, their goals, their risks that they're trying to mitigate, or the threats they're trying to protect against. And this actually goes into building the right solution for them. depending on their RTO, what they're trying to protect against, how quickly they want to recover. And with Bluelock specifically, we work on a consistent basis with our clients on runbook management, on testing, on those things that are critical to ensuring that you have the ability to recover. And then finally, just some places you can go online to learn more about us is we have been recognized by Gartner over the last few years with regards to the Magic Quadrant. And we typically, we're fluctuating between a leader and a visionary within the Magic Quadrant. Very proud of what we've been able to be recognized for there. And then most recently this year, also in the Forrester Wave report. So we'd be more than happy to provide links to those, to that information for you. But that's a little bit about Bluelock, and certainly we'll be willing to answer questions at the end if you have some with regards to Bluelock. But let's get to what this session is really all about, and that is a journey of building a good recovery program for a law firm. And so now we're going to hear from Sherry, but the first question we have, Sherry, is how has Goldberg Kohn's view of IT, business continuity, and disaster recovery, how has it evolved over the past few years?
Sure, Pat. So if I start with the view of IT, as many of the attendees know, law firms have timekeepers and non-timekeepers. At GK, I'm lucky because the partners understand the importance of the staff, but we're still overhead. We're a cost. And as most people know, technology is an expensive line item in the budget. I am seeing the understanding for that growing because of the efficiency the technologies provide and also the security requirements coming from many of our clients. For the disaster recovery piece, it has been a journey. Our executive director, when he started back in 2000, and our director of IT started the disaster recovery program with a colo in the Chicago suburbs. And the main issue was all systems weren't included. So it provided some security and some protection, but not enough. Fast forward, you come to 2009 during the flu epidemic that kind of hit the country, and it became obvious we didn't have a strong people piece of the plan, as I call it, because I was asked, how are we going to handle things if 50% of our workforce called in? So we started to focus a bit on the business continuity piece. We established a crisis management team, a notification system, a remote work plan. In spring of 2014, our management committee asked each of the administrative department heads to develop what I call hit by the bus plan, right? So how is the department going to continue in case of an emergency absence? And during that exercise, the management committee realized that the least amount of expertise or knowledge was about technology. Our lawyers could be experts in HR, finance, and marketing, depending on their practice area and their background. But at the time, no one at our firm was really qualified to be an expert in technology except for our technology team. And in addition, the management committee wanted to know if the firm was competitive on the technology fronts, right? Because we have to remember lawyers are competitive by nature, so we're all trying to keep up with each other. So we did what everybody does when they need help. We called a consultant, and the consultant conducted a technology audit. It was focused mostly on staffing levels, policies and procedures, and the overall system setup. It really didn't focus on security. And 2 of the top 5 areas to address included the disaster recovery strategy and the backup system. So it became very clear from the report that the firm needed to invest in both, and soon. And it was really a question of, do we do it ourselves by updating the colo, or do we hire a cloud provider? So that's kind of our journey, as you call it.
Great, thanks, Sherry. And with regards to a little bit of that education, potentially speak a little bit more. What were some of the concerns that came out of some of those early discussions, either from the managing partners or from folks that were just maybe not a little tech savvy in terms of what was potentially going to take place?
Related to what, Pat? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, just regarding with the journey and with some of the new things that might be coming your way with regards to technology or DR, did the managing partners have any concerns or any issues with some of the solutions or the consultants coming in? What were a little bit of their fears, uncertainties, and doubts, if you will?
Sure. Well, interestingly enough, the management committee actually was the one who had recommended the audit. So we had support from the top at the beginning, which probably could be a little unusual in some firms. We have a very proactive and entrepreneurial management committee, and they're very good about forward thinking. So they were supportive of the idea. I think it was a little bit more challenging for us and for the tech team, just because of the work involved when you go through an audit. We conducted focus groups. There was a full review of the systems. Our director of technology spent, a lot of time answering questions and surveys, and so the legwork on our side was challenging, but not the support from the top level. They were very supportive of it. They were curious about the answers, and we spent a lot of time digesting it afterwards. We're famous for our task force at our firm, and so we had a small group of partners, our director of technology and myself, that were involved, and then kind of digging into the results and prioritizing and analyzing, and coming up with a 2 to 3 year timeline on how we were going to implement some of these initiatives. And some of them we didn't, right? They weren't the right fit for us. It may have been what was happening in the marketplace, but it wasn't a good fit for GK. So does that answer your question?
It sure does. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at question 2, and with regards to the law firm's culture and what effect it had and how ITDR became a priority. Tell us a little bit about the team that you've got there in Chicago, and some of their processes and concerns that they wanted to address as you started down this path.
Sure. So our culture, I think, was the driver for going to the cloud. And I think it's Peter Drucker that said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We're a single office firm in Chicago, a mid-sized firm, about 85 lawyers, 160 employees. And so it was really our culture and our people that kind of pushed this forward. And it's a unique law firm culture in that we don't have a managing partner. We are managed by a management committee, 7 partners and myself, and a lot of our decisions are reached through committees and consensus. We actually don't track billing origination credit, so all of those things kind of minimize the politics and the competition in our culture, and it really contributes to more collegial entrepreneurial environment. We have a very sophisticated client base. Lawyers and clients are 24/7. It's a great group, but as you can imagine, very high performing culture means very high expectations. And the other thing to point out is we compete with large law firms for clients and talent. So it's important to the partners to offer the same level of services, technology, infrastructure, operations that our competitors offer. We're a mid-sized law firm playing in a large marketplace, so we have to be willing to invest in the tools we need to stay competitive. And I think all of that contributes to the support of technology overall. And certainly that support has blossomed since our clients have started asking us to have certain security measures in place in order to continue those relationships.
Okay, great. Good information there. That's, I think, great insight. Let's, as we take a look at question 3, when you realized change was needed with existing solutions, what initiated that realization, and why did you select DRaaS as the best choice? And you talked a little bit about the cloud, but in addition to that, what other things were going into this decision?
Sure. So I think the audit was the push that made us realize or confirm to leadership that we needed to do something. And then it was just really a question of, do we update the co-location out in the Chicago suburbs, or do we outsource it? We went through, as you can imagine, quite the analysis, and there were 2 major obstacles with continuing the co-location: staffing and failback. Related to staffing, our technology team is 6 people, and really only 2 were equipped to run the colo during a disaster, and that's just too risky. Somebody's on vacation, somebody's out on leave. It was just too risky for us. And then if you consider the technology talent pool is increasingly becoming so competitive, we had concerns about being able to find, hire, and retain the right talent for that task over time. The other big driver was the failback issue. The way the colo was set up at the time, if a disaster were to hit and we were to fail over, in order to fail back, we required all users to stop working in the system until we brought the data back after a disaster. And because of that, we never tested it. It was too complicated. It was too disruptive to our end users. And so we just didn't take that chance of testing it. Well, then, as I'm sure everybody knows, clients started asking in the last 2-3 years, all these security questionnaires come through, and they want to know, how often do you test your plan? Can you send us the results? And we wouldn't have been able to do that and answer that question very easily. We certainly conducted a BIA and a gap analysis, and we worked with a consultant through that part of it to map out potential solutions for DRaaS. While our tech team is certainly knowledgeable, this is a very specific area and there's a lot of moving pieces. It's a huge investment. And so, the director of technology, myself, and our technology partner felt it was worth the investment to bring a consultant on board. We did a cost analysis, and after much digestion, decided that outsourcing was really the best for us. And we wanted a hybrid solution, which I think is a pretty unique ask. We wanted a run environment, a ready environment. We needed a small colo due to some unique softwares we have, and then we needed a backup piece in the cloud. And because of that uniqueness and that complexity, we decided to cast a large net during the RFQ process. And we reached out and had about 6 vendors that we included. In the end, after a very lengthy process, it came down to 2 vendors who we felt could meet our needs for a solution. Both vendors were very successful in the marketplace and the niches, so the firm really had to decide which direction we were going to go. And to a lot of people, disaster recovery and business continuity is an insurance policy, right? It's a small risk, but it's a big impact. So that just complicated things even more because you don't always have everyone's buy-in.
Okay, great. And with regards to the security questionnaire, I'm sure we'll probably get some questions around that, as that seems to be one of those issues that is increasing in terms of popularity from your clients with regards to whether or not they're financial services or healthcare. So I'm hoping we get some questions from the audience on that one towards the end. Okay, so throughout the DRaaS process, what were some aha moments and what helpful insight was provided as well, since this was really a new technology for the firm?
Sure. For me, there's a lot of acronyms in the industry. I had to learn about RPO and RTO and what a colo was and run and hot and cold. It was a lot to take in for a non-techie person, which I certainly am. It also takes a lot of time and commitment to truly understand and evaluate the differences between the providers and offerings. I guess I expected it to be more of an apples to apples comparison. It was nowhere near that. And I relied a lot on our director of technology and our network manager to explain things to me in layman's terms. I like spreadsheets and I couldn't fit everything into a spreadsheet. So it became very challenging for me at times. The other thing you have to realize is it's not an immediate decision. You're most likely going to marry this provider, right? There's a lot of setup. It's going to be very difficult to kind of leave that provider. Not impossible, but certainly difficult because of the amount of time you've invested during the implementation and the setup, and the monies you've spent for that particular program. And so you just have to plan the research and RFQ or RFP process and the implementation when you can really focus on it, because it takes a huge amount of energy. Some of the great insight we got was from the Bluelock team. I always, tease Pat that he was great in translating a lot of the information for us. And Bluelock really wanted to be a business solutions consultant, and that's what we needed. We needed to understand how all the pieces fit together. We didn't know all the options available to us. And so that's what we needed. And it was great that one of the vendors we had asked to bid was willing to take that outside perspective and say, okay, well, here's what we think you want. Here's what we can offer you. Let's see how we can work that through. Bluelock spent a lot of time asking us about what we needed. They really didn't try and sell us a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think that's important because you don't want to have to try and fit a square peg in a round hole when it comes to something so valuable as your data. The hardest part was doing all that analysis and decision making up front that they forced us to do, right? That's how we were going to be able to get to the right solution. But because of the importance of the project, you really have to spend the time and effort at the beginning to make sure you're getting it right. Again, small risk, big impact. We got a lot of great insight from the implementation team. We're currently finishing up implementation, and we've certainly hit some roadblocks. It's expected, but the Bluelock implementation team have been very creative, very thoughtful. They're great at follow-up, very structured in the planning and the processes. So that insight has been really helpful because we've never done this before, right? You guys are the experts. That's what we're paying you for. So it's nice to be able to get that value even through the implementation stage.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And as we move on to question 5, we'll talk a little bit about the challenges. And you alluded to that a little bit, but challenges potentially either internally or for the project. Tell us a little bit about what you faced along the way.
Sure. Well, I think the hybrid solution that we were looking for presented some challenges in finding a vendor that could really offer everything we wanted without having to outsource some piece of it. We had several vendors recommend that they could do a run and ready and backup, but we would have to outsource our small colo, or we could keep the colo ourselves. And, it kept going back to, in a disaster, do we want to have to make 2 calls? Do we want to have to make 1 call and send our network manager who's valuable to that DR process out to one of the suburbs to get the colo up and running? And so that was concerning to us, and it certainly was a unique ask as I understand it. The other challenge we faced or question was, do we want white glove service or the basics? It really was a Cadillac versus a Chevy option. And that's something the partners had to discuss. It's their money supporting this and paying for it. And the director of technology and I had to go through the process of educating what that means. In a disaster, do you want to be able to continue operating almost like you are in the office, right? It's never going to be 100% identical. Or do we want to have some challenges along the way, but save a lot of money or save some amount of money? And so those were healthy discussions at the partnership level and at committee level. There was a lot of information to digest, and we really had to translate it into layman's terms. We played liaison between the tech folks and the leadership and trying to translate that and answer questions. And as many folks know, lawyers wanted market data on what other firms were doing, right? There's challenges to finding detailed information about the metrics. What do other firms have as their RPO, their RTO? What vendors are they using? Certainly the ILTA survey is helpful and has some of the basics, but to dive down and get some metrics to help us set up our process was very challenging to find. And certainly there was the trust factor of the cloud, right? I kept hearing, is it okay to put our clients and our employee information in the cloud? What does that mean? And so we had to build some understanding and trust of the cloud. And we did that through education. We did that through, one-on-one meetings for some people and committee meetings, and just kind of walking through, even to let people know what the cloud is, something so simple as that. A huge challenge along the way was understanding the security and privacy requirements that were coming from our clients. Our director of technology has spreadsheet upon spreadsheet of which client is asking for what and what certifications are needed and testing levels, et cetera. And we had to make a determination if the 2 vendors at the end could meet those requirements. So that took a lot of time. Once we actually were down to selecting Bluelock, we had to go through the contract review. And because we weren't experts in the field, we had to do a lot of research to make sure the contract that we were getting was fair and right for the firm and obviously for Bluelock, because it's supposed to be a mutual relationship. So there was a lot of research done in that, getting it through legal, trying to get experts to weigh in on some of the technology pieces of it. And one of the challenges we faced during implementation, we happened to be down a technology member who would have been very hands-on for the implementation process. And so our network manager took this implementation on at 100% without a lot of support from the secondary team member. And we were replicating a large amount of data. I'm always surprised at the size of our data. I think this is the one time when you don't brag about size because it's embarrassing. It's so much. And trying to figure out how we're going to get that through the pipe to Bluelock and not disrupt any of the users or, pay an arm and a leg for security cloud storage.
Okay, Sherry, that was a great response, and there's a couple things. Actually, there's three things in there that I'd like to just camp on just for a moment, because these are things that are not just unique necessarily to Goldberg, but things that we're seeing as well, and just need a little further explanation maybe for the audience. But the first one being the hybrid solution that you were looking for. This is something that we see quite a bit, whether it's for virtual environments or physical or combination. We see a lot of clients coming to us with that environment because your data centers evolved over time, and you may have tape backups, you may have physical servers, and then a virtual environment, and then some co-location. But when it comes to recovery, you need all of that to work consistently and together, just as your current production environment does. So that is something we see with a law firm, say Goldberg side, or with some of our large clients that have several hundred virtual machines running. So something that we see that is pretty common would be the hybrid solution. The second piece is the backups, and that is something that we do see quite often, and really across industry as well, and that is depending on your retention, your rotation cycle, your retention policies, we know the backups have accumulated. And for some law firms, it may be everything gets backed up. For others, there may be the final case or certain types of documents or email, as well as the document management system, et cetera. So that being the case, though, there just needs to be an analysis of, well, what happens in a DR scenario with your backups? And so that's something that we find good conversation around. But to Sherry's point, it's one of those things where it's probably accumulated to a higher level than what you've thought it would have. And then when you're taking a look at either migrating to the cloud or implementing a DR solution, you have to take that into consideration. So that there's a conversation there for sure.
Well, and one of the things, Pat, I'll just weigh in on that is, as I had mentioned earlier, we did the business impact analysis early on in the process. And when we came through for implementation, we kind of pulled that out of the folder and went through and moved some stuff around, now understanding what was involved with going to, flipping the switch in the disaster, et cetera. So that was really helpful, and I would encourage people to do that if they haven't already. It can be challenging at law firms to get people to agree what should be prioritized software-wise, one over the other, because some departments may want their software up immediately. Does it need to be payroll up immediately? And so that can be challenging and lengthy, and it's probably wise to have that established before you go to DRaaS, because you're going to need to use it pretty quickly during the implementation process. And in addition, you're going to be making a ton of decisions during the implementation process, and people may just get fatigued.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point, because it's not easy necessarily going through that during the implementation, or most certainly during testing, et cetera. So great feedback, great feedback. And then the one final piece was the security privacy requirements. Again, something that is very common, and for Goldberg Kohn, very important because of the clients that they work with. And so again, encourage the audience to review, what does that actually mean? Is that encrypted data at rest or in transit? Is it the physical facilities at tier 3 versus tier 4 data centers? So understanding what is going to be required, what are your clients looking for from the client demand that Sherry talked about previously in the audits. You're certainly learning a lot, and so that should become part of the conversation with whatever provider you might be looking for. So I'm glad you hit on those three things, because those three things we certainly are seeing on a daily basis across the legal industry.
Pat, let me ask you on the hybrid solution, because I'm surprised to hear it's more common now, and I'm grateful for that. I'm glad we're not the oddity. Does that hybrid solution include backup, or are you seeing it more just run ready and potentially a small colo?
Also on the backup. So, and when Sherry is referring to run ready, we have three different environments. Think of run as that hot environment, ready as that warm environment, and then we have a restore that is that cold environment, if you will. And so as we take a look at working within each of those environments, comes into play virtual environments as well as potentially physical devices. So for example, someone may want to put a physical firewall in a co-location space and manage it themselves, even though it's for DR. Or it could be in that warm environment of applications that need to be brought back up to where the application though rests on a physical server, and so we just use different solutions to replicate that information over. So when we talk about that complex environment or hybrid environment, we are seeing that to be more common. Whereas maybe a few years ago, folks were just really taking their virtual environments and pushing those to the cloud from a DR perspective. It appears with the client demand, the security risks, it's now becoming more of a comprehensive recovery strategy than just DR or just backup. Does that help, Sherry?
It does. And, one of the reasons we have our colo is because we have a small set of software that operate most efficiently and effectively in a physical server, I think is the right phrase, as opposed to virtual. So that's for the group on the line, the reason why we have that colo in existence. I don't think if not for that, we wouldn't have it.
Yep, agreed. And a lot of times for the audience, we see that being possibly, it could be a phone system, it could be an older application that is running on a different type of database, et cetera, or, there's just unique situations. And so when that occurs, we go ahead and co-locate that, do a cross-connect into the DRaaS environment, and we're good to go.
Great.
Good deal. All right, let's move on to the next question here. I think we're doing pretty good on time. What about advice for the audience on ways to explain the business value of DR to those non-technical stakeholders? And you've covered quite a bit of that, but anything else that you might add to that?
Sure. So I think it's important to find out what's important to the key stakeholders and determine if your current DR system meets those requirements, right? Kind of your own gap analysis. We asked ourselves if our clients would understand a DR situation if the city of Chicago was knocked out. And we thought, yes, probably. That's, global, that gets the news. But then we went a little bit deeper and we asked, what if our servers or a building went down? And knowing how much our clients rely on us, we thought, probably not. There's going to be a short window of tolerance. They have business expectations. And so to meet our clients' expectations, we really needed to invest in our DR and business continuity and backup systems. And that was kind of our analysis. We looked also to outside resources or requirements that we could use to convince our partners or your stakeholders. One example I like to give is the Model Rule 1.1 of the ABA came through, I want to say maybe 18 months ago, where it created a new requirement of lawyers to be competent in technology, including the benefits and risks associated with that relevant technology, and to ensure the confidentiality of that data. And so I was able to look to one of the guidelines that the lawyers are required to follow as support for why we need to be more thoughtful and better prepared in case of a disaster, right? We have to ensure that our data is safe and that we can serve our clients. And then look at your own privacy and security policies and your breach response plans. Are there any gaps there that maybe DRaaS could fill? We did conduct a very simple needs assessment, and I would recommend others go through that. And we said to ourselves, what is our organization lacking? Do we have clients that require us to be available 24/7? Do we have the ability to answer the tough questions from our clients about how their information is being protected and confidential? Do we have the ability to pay our employees if the infrastructure were to disappear? Do we have the ability to connect with our employees to make sure they're safe during a disaster? And so just some simple questions really digging at, where's the hole, where's the gap, and do we have the equipment now to handle that, or do we have to outsource it? We did do a one-page summary analysis to the partnership with very general information and advantages versus disadvantages, and of course a cost analysis that's always in the equation. But we thought, keeping it simple is best, and most people just want a 30,000-foot view. And if anybody wanted more detailed information, we certainly could have those sidebar conversations with them. But sometimes if you fill the paper with too much information, it's overwhelming. They don't have time to deal with it. They don't want to deal with it, and they just move on. Due diligence is key. I come from an HR background, so I believe in that. And so not only did we get references from both vendors, but we also asked for their certification reports. And I actually read them. It was very exciting, let me tell you. And I asked both vendors if they had any breaches. And then I actually checked and made sure that was true. And you can do that through the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. You can search on that system by industry, by date, by company name, etc. So it's just a good checks and balance. I think if we were to do anything differently, because that's one of the questions I always ask when I call a reference, I would say that we probably would try and do a better analysis of our backup data size and our growth projections. I think we were not very effective with that analysis. We just didn't realize how much data we had and what was going to be important that we had to back up and bring over into the environment. And that changes, right? I mean, that's a constant analysis that should be ongoing, but I think we would have done a little bit better job of that up front. And I think that covers most of my thoughts.
Well, thank you. That was very thorough. And even though that's the last question, one thing I want to kind of end with before we open it up for questions is some of the things that Sherry spoke of is really, she commented on the fact that really moving from a DR backup perspective to more of a recovery and availability, and that's really what we're seeing take place within the legal industry. Again, from our perspective, is that law firms are looking for how can I be both proactive, but when that event happens, because it's not if, it is when, then how can I best be reactive? And so the platform that Goldberg now has in place allows them to be somewhat proactive with the solutions that we have in place, but certainly reactive to anything that takes place, all the way down to, should they be hit by ransomware? If it is caught immediately, the ability to pause replication, take a look at the journal, go back to a recovery point prior to when the corruption took place, and then being able to pull that forward and recover from there. So it's what we're seeing, or what we're calling moving from disaster recovery strategy to more of a availability strategy. And so at the end of the day, that's one of the things I believe Goldberg now has in place very firmly.
Well, and Pat, we updated our breach response plan for that. One of our first calls is supposed to be to our cybersecurity expert and policy or insurance carrier, and Bluelock's now up there as well. So we know to call you first.
There you go. That's good. We need to be up. We need to be up on that list. Well, I think Gail has been monitoring or collecting questions along the way, so I'm going to have her come back on and let us see if we have any questions that we can answer.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pat and Sherry, for the presentation today. There were lots of good information. Okay, folks, to our members, the evaluations are now being put up on the screen. We ask you to take a few seconds to complete them while we go into the Q&A process. All right. We have quite a few questions out there, so let's get started. Sorry, you seem to have a scratchy voice. Okay, so The first question is so Zerto is your underlying technology?
Pat, you're going to have to respond to that one. I'm not a techie. I know Zerto's part of it.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, yes, we do utilize Zerto for continuous replication in that ready environment that we spoke of, or that warm environment. So we use multiple solutions depending on what the client's needs are. So for example, in that cold environment or that restore environment, we're using Veeam for basically recoverable backups. In the run environment, it's essentially a production environment that's being used for DR, so there's obviously no replication tools that are necessary there. And then on the physical side, we'll use a solution double take. So a client, again, going back to that hybrid environment, we very well could be using Zerto, Veeam, double take, potentially other solutions to make it a comprehensive availability strategy.
So it's very customizable.
Yes, very customizable.
Okay, great. Okay, on to our next question. How do you test a failback now? Still must be risky.
Okay. Well, I know we get sandbox testing. I assume that's what you're going to talk about.
Yes, yes. So we actually do a complete sandbox test that essentially takes the process all the way up to before you would actually switch over DNS and actually move your production to Bluelock. And so we have the ability to test all the way to that level, and then also test the stream as when it would actually go back as well. We have very few clients that do full failover tests live, where they're actually shutting down the production, using Bluelock for an interim period of time, and then doing a failback. But we actually go through that exercise, but skip the part of changing the DNS, but we do hydrate the test environment and then monitor how it would actually flow back to the production side. And sorry, if you're looking for something a little bit more technical, I'm not an engineer. I'd have to answer that offline.
Okay, all right, here's our next question. How do you convince your board and chiefs that this is not a project that can be run by IT completely, because there is a huge human portion to this project?
Absolutely true. For us, because we're staffed pretty leanly, we just did a quick analysis of the amount of hours it would take to do the analysis and come up with the recommendation and do the RFQ process. And it just became very clear that with a team of 6, we had to hire the consultant. And I'm assuming that's what that question is about. Plus, outsourcing. For us, it was easy because the 2 people that would have been able to handle that, like I said, what if somebody's on vacation? What if somebody's out on leave and then the second person takes a vacation? We were just too vulnerable. And depending on your staffing, you may have a similar situation where only 3 of your team could do it. Well, what if turnover happens and you don't have an expert? It's just leaving yourself too vulnerable to rely, at least for us, on our team because of our size and how leanly we're staffed. Pat, I don't know if you want to add anything on that, what you've seen from other clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sherry. So the only part I would add is that as you are looking at providers, one of the things that Goldberg was looking at, if you recall, was that ability to outsource not just the technology, but also the service level. So as you're taking a look at DRaaS providers, get a good understanding of how far are they with you throughout the business continuity planning and disaster recovery phases. So we're essentially kind of hand in hand with Goldberg. We will have quarterly business review meetings with them. They can certainly update with regards to, say, firewall changes at any point in time through our cloud solutions team or our support team. And in addition to that, from a testing perspective, we test twice a year. And we actually manage the run book for them. So we take their changes, it's a conversation with regards to what it is and understand the consequences, and building out that run book. We actually call it a playbook because we have multiple different types of scenarios built into that documentation, because there could be a scenario of when the Goldberg IT team is available and it's a partial failover, for whatever reason, or for that, as Sherry alluded to, Chicago's no longer there, and so Bluelock's going to have to manage the entire failover process for Goldberg because they're with their families or they cannot get to the office or whatever the case might be. So having a good understanding of the type of provider you're looking for, if you're just looking for a replication tool, that's going to be certain types of providers. If you're looking for more full service, such as a Bluelock, then those are different types of providers as well. And we have what we look at essentially from an assisted versus a managed. So there's a spectrum, but we work with the client to understand what level of service they're looking for. So I hope that helps, Gail.
Okay, we have one more question. How long did it take you to complete the configuration from the time you signed a contract with Bluelock until the time you signed off on a successful failover test?
So I'll take the first part of that. I think on average implementation is maybe 90 days, 120 days. We signed the contract at the end of last year. We had a little delay in starting our implementation because of some staffing issues on our side. And we completed, because we have three environments technically, we have completed one of our tests, and we're in the process of conducting the 2 other tests in mid-July. It has been a lengthy process, but it has been a very thorough process, and it is nothing that I would say is anybody's fault. I don't feel like our team has failed or Bluelock has failed. It certainly had some challenges to it and things we weren't expecting. And the thing I'm most impressed about with the implementation team of Bluelock is how creative they are. We've hit a few road bumps and we've all kind of sat there scratching our head. And the next day I get an email from Dave Mercer, who's our plan manager, and he'll say, okay, we brainstormed and here's what we're going to do. So I think on average it's 3 to 4 months, Pat. For GK it's been a little bit longer just because of some challenges with our staffing.
Nope, I would, well said. Nothing for me to add.
Okay, we have 2 more questions and then we can wrap this up. What are the most recent threats against law firms?
Pat, that's probably for you, yeah?
Yeah, I'll take that. So obviously the news yesterday in terms of threats, ransomware, as people are seeing ransomware, it's the simplest form of intrusion. It's an email. And the proactive piece or the preventative piece is about educating your employees about ransomware, basically how it enters in and how sophisticated basically the attackers are getting with regards to the emails and how they can craft them from someone within your organization or have the attachment look a certain way or a website that you think you might know. So a lot of it from a preventative perspective goes into the training. But ransomware, I would say, would be at number 1 on the list. From the ILTA survey from 2016, we saw that security management was like 67% of everyone that sent in a survey responded affirmative that security management was the number 1 priority for the law firm. And no one wants to be that law firm on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for any type of breach to any degree, because as we've learned in working with our law firm partners or law firm clients, is their reputation is the number 1 asset, right? And so trying to protect that is priority 1. But the hackers also realize that the data you have is absolutely critical for them to get to do what they want to do. And so ransomware would be number 1 on the list.
Okay, our last question. In your opinion, what is the biggest risk I am trying to protect against in an event?
Boy, I think that could change depending who you ask. I think for us, it's connectivity. Our firm, our industry is so 24/7. Everyone is connected. Clients constantly expect an immediate response. And so for us, if we were to lose connectivity to email, it'd be really challenging for our clients and for our lawyers and very frustrating. Pat, I don't know if you have a different thought.
No, I would say, yeah, connectivity. One of the things that we see as an underlying factor, there's a lot of providers that can do DR and provide a solution to replicate. But what we see underneath the covers is networking and connectivity is your weakest link. So if you're trying to ensure that you can stay connected or have the ability to fail over and continue your operations, then networking is number one on the list for those looking for connectivity. But there's also loss of data that is also important as well. Kind of goes along with the networking, the connectivity piece, but for some firms, it's any loss of data we can't suffer because the clients that we're working with, if we're working with a one of the largest banks in the world, let alone the country, and we're doing documentation for them, any loss of data is not going to be tolerated, and so you risk losing a client. And that kind of goes into the third one that I mentioned previously, which is that reputational risk. You're trying to protect your firm's reputation, whether you're a large firm with several thousand attorneys, or if you're a medium-sized firm that has Fortune 50 clients, and you know they're working with larger firms, you don't want to be the one that has some type of breach or some type of risk to your reputation.
Okay, well, Sherry, Pat, thank you so much for the great presentation. Everyone else, thanks for attending, and we will see you on the next webinar. So everyone, enjoy, if you're in my area, the nice weather. Otherwise, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Gail.
Thanks, Gail.